So here we are, gentlemen. This is the next session of Vervaeke's discussion on Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Episode 11 and 12 is what we're discussing, more or less. Both of these episodes are focused on higher states of consciousness. And how about Cam, you kick us off? What do you think? You want to try that? Just frame what you took away and what were a couple of points that you want to make.
Well, I do know the primary thing that I would love to explore with you guys has to do, I don't remember the term for sure off the top of my head, but I think it's allostasis. So he goes through the bit about...
Your audio is a little way, we can't hear you very clearly. It's a lot of echo. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in a can, in a.
You might not be. You might be too far from the microphone. That's all.
Well, let's see. Maybe start with somebody else then, and let me see if I can get a headset going.
Okay, Michael.
Okay, let me. I can give it a shot. And
Vish, go ahead.
Vish, go for it.
So I think I got what Cam was trying to say, which I think was the term that Vervaeke uses to explain the shift from the egocentric point of view to this sort of loss of self and a oneness that you feel. So it's reframing your perspective in terms of what he later calls the Solomon effect. I think that's in episode 12, right? So it's this third-party perspective, and that's the frame of reference where you are able to see both the good and the bad in variance. I think that's what he calls them. I found that interesting. I mean, my overall perception of these two episodes, right? I think my takeaway was that he was trying to focus on what he calls the descriptive and prescriptive definitions of a higher state of consciousness. And for me personally, I felt like I was already in a place where I knew I wanted to access that. So it wasn't as much of a personal question for me about, should I trust people who have these? Is it really worth going to a higher state of consciousness? Is there a legitimacy to it? So there was less of a personal resonance with the topics, but I still found some of the things that Vervaeke spoke through very interesting. I'm trying to think of the main one for me, which I think was his explanation of the higher state of consciousness as being in a state of fluency and flow between yourself and the world and your relationship, which makes sense. I mean, there's so much continuity between what he has previously brought up as, the flow state and what he describes as some of the common experiences of people in higher states of consciousness. So that was interesting to me. But Cam, you're back. So is that what you were trying to bring up, the non-egocentric point of view? And
yeah, he talked about taking all of the sense-making apparatus that is generally oriented towards the self, the egotistical sense of self, and switching it so that I think he used the North Pole as an example. So you're in relation to this North Pole. And whatever it is that triggers that or drives that or trains that capacity to shift from the two, because the ego, I don't think, goes away. But that was the most intriguing thing out of the two. I mean, there was a lot of stuff in both of these, but that of everything, that's the most intriguing part for me. Because I noticed, I'll say one more thing and then I'll be quiet, but I've really, over the course of about the last 6 to 12 months, paid very close attention to the use of the possessive in speech. So patterns of speech, my own speech, like they're my problems, or they're simply problems, that's a simple example. I think you guys get it. And I've trained to not use the possessive. And what I've discovered is that it is very rarely actually necessary to use.
So what do you say instead of my problem?
Well, pick something. you could just say it's the problem.
Oh, the problem or a, but not my. Interesting.
Instead of using the possessive, which is that to me corresponds with the left hemispherical apprehending mode.
Yep.
The having mode. Switch the pattern of speech to not use the possessive.
Right. Interesting.
It's that, I don't know if I'm slipping into McGilchrist's scheme of.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think it totally fits into this anyway, in my opinion. Go ahead.
How have you found that to help you, or what shift that has that allowed you to make?
I don't know yet. What I've noticed is that how ubiquitous I find it in contemporary idiom, and how almost unnecessary it actually is. And I definitely notice it in terms of, I'll find people complaining about their problem. And I'm like, free yourself, bro. You don't have to possess them. As one example. So, it actually relates to, I think I heard Rafe Kelly use the term allostasis in place of homeostasis in some dialogue that he was having. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was the first time that I ever noticed the term.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he did. Yeah, so allostasis is when the body responds to stressors in an attempt to regain homeostasis. So it's an adaptive response.
It kind of shifted my thinking in that. I don't know if it was him that was pointing it out simultaneously or somewhere else, but you think about walking. Walking is a continuous fall.
Yeah.
You're always becoming, losing and reestablishing balance. You're wandering back and forth across this balanced state.
Well, part of what comes to mind when you bring this up, and I think it's very insightful what you're saying, is that I'm becoming quite hyper aware through my studies of things even besides this course of how absurd it is to say that in a relationship one person is the problem. It's actually almost literally impossible to be true unless it's someone's a sociopath or something, because it's a relationship. It's not it's not two independent entities that don't interrelate. It's like really interesting to see how the different framings will affect how we decide what has to be done about something, right, or not. Because that's, and also my experience in relationships is that as soon as one person shifts, the other person shifts one way or another. And it's not, who knows who's first, by the way. It's really hard to tell, who really shifted. I mean, it's hard to tell if you're really honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a co-creative process, as McGilchrist says. So it's not a us and them or you and me. It's us in co-creative dynamic, which is a flow state, I believe, in a sense. I think ultimately, but yeah, that's well. What I also wanted to add that I think what he said is that when you shift from the self to the world, you're repurposing the program. You're not really changing it so much as repurposing. Is that, you guys hear that too?
Yes, he uses the term exapting, I think.
The machinery that you had for making sense of yourself and making yourself egocentric is a machinery now you're trying to make sense of things that are outside.
Yeah. And what did he say, that you put yourself together? That was an interesting way of putting it, by the way. I don't know if I completely understand what he means by that, but I think I do. And so I'm guessing, did you guys have a clear understanding about what he meant by that? Because he says it in relationship to the world too, by the way, but it's self-centric, rather than world-centric.
I don't know if I have a clear understanding. I'll tell you what I took away from it,
Yeah.
which is that a large parts of our identity are constructed in relation to the things around us.
Yes. That's
So yeah, we build up our notions of who we are based on either things we identify or disidentify with, and the way that I guess the environment responds to us.
so. How does
and
that?
I took
Oh, go ahead.
his
Sorry.
acceptation to mean use the same machinery not to understand yourself, but to understand the environment instead. And so
Okay. So that's, and now how does that change? The thing I didn't quite get is if you're focusing on understanding the environment, how do you factor in?
So I took it away to mean the way that he talks about what he calls participatory change.
Yeah.
yes,
And he says when you're doing egocentrism, in his words, is a broad category of error where you're just focusing on yourself. But what you need to do is focus on yourself and the environment you're in. And the participatory nature of that has to change. And that means the whole idea of figuring out whether the change has to happen in the environment or in yourself. And he calls that the gluing together.
So that
And he says things like, he talks about character as a way of changing yourself in response to what's required to have a better grip on the world. Then he says a coupling with the world is a way of the disclosing not just what the world is, but disclosing and discovering what you are. And he uses love as an example of mutually disclosing process that you have with someone else. And then he finally says that the self itself is a set of functions that integrate and complexify by gluing with the world. So he's basically saying the higher states of consciousness allow you to, what he calls, have both the gestalt and the part, and gestalt and the part. And you basically go like an accordion, which he uses quite often. And he says, this is essential for you to get an optimal grip and come up with new ways of looking at the world. You have to break the frame and you have to reframe, break the frame, reframe.
But he talks about how you have to break the frame and reframe, but at the same time have a certain awareness that allows you to see what's revealed from the broken frame, right? That's
exactly.
Right? So that
exactly.
was an interesting.
So that's the distancing. That's when you break the frame, you step out and look at what's broken and say, oh, this is changing. I need to change. This is changing. Now I am glued into it. And now I'm trying to see whether it makes sense or not. So that's what he means by that. And he says the mystical experiences is the machinery gluing to make sense of the world, like removing and gluing itself, which is very interesting because he makes a point on information processing. And he says, just like in information processing, when you're fitting a curve to a random set of spots, you can overfit and underfit. And ultimately, you're trying to reduce the sum of total errors, cumulative errors underneath it. He said there is some randomness. If you perfectly fit it, then you have lost you have gained nothing. There's no generalization. If you generalize it, then there's too much noise and you missed out capturing the detail. And he says, just like in information processing, you have to know that there has to be disruption or noise to generate new insight. That is why when you go to a higher state of consciousness, you disrupt your current frame and hopefully some quote unquote noise or new information comes in that allows you to have fresh insight. And now you glue together with the world in a different way.
And I think that's really well said. Thank you. I also was intrigued when he said when you take psilocybin, you can have both those processes simultaneously working at once, which I thought was extremely intriguing thing to put forth. I mean, I was like, because I've only done microdoses of psilocybin. I've never done a journey. And I agree with him, by the way. I've thought this for years. It's so funny because I watched my hippie parents and their friends do all kinds of drugs when I was a kid. And my perception is that it did absolutely nothing to truly break their frame. Because they didn't have the proper preparation, as he talks about, and support. but let's see, what was that reminding me of? Oh, here's the part that I also wanted to have you guys help me clarify. He talks about that if you are not able, if you don't know how to break frame, and I think this is how he said, no matter what you put in the system adjusts to keep the frame it has. Is that what I heard him say?
Yeah.
That was super freaking cool. I mean, that was like, yes, that's why people can come in contact, even all of us, of course, with something profound, and it doesn't actually have any effect because it just gets adapted. It gets adaptively integrated into the frame that won't break. I mean, I think is that what I heard him say in that lecture?
Yeah, so first of all, before I answer that, did my microphone change?
Yeah, you're much better. Thank you.
Sorry that took so long, fellas.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think he goes back and gives the 9-dot problem as the example.
Exactly.
Where there's a framing that's going on that you're unconscious of that is preventing you from being able to solve the problem. And
you won't shift
it,
your view, right?
yeah, and I think that's the basis of all conservatism. It's like it's been working, so I'm going to keep the frame.
Yes.
Because it's been working so far.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It keeps adjusting to fit till it doesn't. Well, I'll say until the pain gets your attention.
Hopefully, but even some people are immune to that. I've discovered. I've seen like even addicts. He talks about. Does he talk about addiction? Or I know I read that somewhere else. Addiction. Oh yeah, he does.
He
says
does. In the next episode,
in that episode, that's right.
He goes into it big time.
The parasitic processing. That's right. That's in the next episode. So, yeah, I think that's really profoundly helpful to have it put that way for me to understand that if you can't break frame, you're not going to be able to see anything differently. And no matter what you put in front of yourself, you're going to put it in the frame you're in somehow. It's just going to adapt to that, right?
What's interesting about that, and an observation I made, he didn't come out and say it explicitly, but I think he implies it, which is that breaking frame, to Cam's point, is not an easy process because we are comfortable creatures and we want, if the frame is working, stay with it. That's why many of the higher states of consciousness require you to fast, hunger, sleep deprivation, some way of letting your frame break literally, so that you're not like comfortable in the state. Conversely, I think at what he calls the 4 levels of knowing, at the propositional level of knowing, when we become too wedded to the set of propositions, our belief systems, our ideology, then we have this rejection mechanism that a new input comes in and it doesn't fit my received set of propositions, and I just reject it. It's just immediate rejection.
Just bounces
there's confirmation bias, etc. So that also is a frame that needs to be broken, and that doesn't break 9 out of 10 times. More deeply, we are committed to that cognitive set of propositions.
God, that's really well said. Now there's another thing here that he goes into that I'm very intrigued by. And he says that. So, well, first of all, one of the things I did want to touch on is that it seems to me that what he's saying about higher states of consciousness is that it's a higher level of adaptive response. Is that part? That's kind of how I've framed it.
What do you mean?
Well, meaning that
it's something like you got the frame rate right, is how I think about it. So along all sense pathways, that just you're breaking a frame. Your fitting is happening at the proper. It's happening at the same frame rate as reality,
or at least close, right? Yeah, exactly. So you're keeping up, right, with the relevance and the sorting of things for relevance, and therefore you don't fall into bullshit, right? You're not going down the wrong path, right? You're actually staying reasonably on course for what is good and just in the world, so to speak. I mean, I don't know if he quite says that, but I would guess that that's part of what it is, or even healthy or function. I mean, I think sometimes in more scientific terms, like the reason I said adaptive, because what I've been studying with things like polyvagal theory is that in polyvagal theory, when you are not aligned, well, how should I say this? When your nervous system is overwhelmed by trauma, you tend to get stuck in states of response that are attack and defense only. So there's no safety and there's no social connection there, or very little. And that's fine if you're in a war, like if you're in a battle. But if you're not in a battle, it's highly maladaptive, because what happens is you're responding to the world as if, and it's a false as if, it's actually a mistaken as if. And therefore you're creating all kinds of chaos for yourself and others as a result. And I don't think this is any different, actually. I think that what he's saying is that higher states of consciousness equal optimal response and sorting of relevance from moment to moment. And therefore you're going to create more harmony and good in the world, because you're not, running your truck through in a convenience store rather than driving around it. I mean, it's like that kind of thing. Because you're perceiving properly as you go. I would think that's I mean, does that make sense? Did I say that clearly?
It does, and I will point out that he opens episode 11 with, if you look at the table of contents in the notes that we have, the points are clarity, beauty, peace, and joy.
Oh yeah, that.
What he sees are the reported findings of people from the higher state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what's interesting is that he doesn't come out and say that, and that's why I wanted to see your reaction, hear your reaction. Is he saying higher states of consciousness are unqualified good and therefore should be sought? Or is he saying these are just like transformative experience or mystical experiences, a higher state that can give us this like break frame and all that? So I'm not sure how normative he goes all the way. Does he say one should seek it and it's important and that's the optimal? Or is he saying it's a continuum? Some people get there and it's good. I wasn't quite sure about that.
Well, I think he's a scientist. He's not going to tell you the should. He's just going to tell you what is.
Well, plus I don't know if it insinuates the right word, but throughout these lectures, he's framed this as, I mean, if you think about it, you're going to find relevance rather than bullshit. You're going to have correlation rather and causation sorted out. I think that insinuates good pretty strongly, right? Because if all you're doing is chasing bullshit around and believing it, I think we can deduct that is not good. I think that would be considered a negative and not a positive thing to want. And do you guys agree with that one?
Yeah, well, so good is always in relation. Good is only meaningful in relation. So if I'm Satan and I don't want you guys getting it, then it ain't good for me.
That's true. Well, you could say for the greater good or for a higher good, meaning I mean, I've always assumed that higher states of consciousness are automatically associated with a better way of being overall. I mean, that's my assumption. Buddha, he says, it's also, well, it alleviates suffering too, or unnecessary suffering, I should say. And then next episode, he talks about that, which I can't wait to talk about that one, because that's super interesting. But anyway.
And I'll also say, Anurag, in response to your question, what I took away about how he frames it is that the mechanisms in our brain interpret these higher states of consciousness as being very trustworthy and as being very insightful. And it primes us to get insight. But, he has that little cautionary thing at the end, which is, participatory knowledge is not the same as propositional knowledge. So what you shouldn't do is come away from that higher state and take the propositional knowledge from it. You should use the transformation that it induces in you instead.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Vish, because that was a very salient moment for me when he talked about that. That's something that McGilchrist talks about a lot. He says that when we become left brain dominant, we lose the ability to, what was that part of the intuitive thing? Let's see here. Plausibility. That comes
Yes,
later.
plausibility.
So basically what happens is when you become hyper rational, you lose the ability for plausibility because you follow the logic so carefully without an overview that you believe all kinds of bullshit that doesn't make sense. So that's anyway, yeah, very, very interesting.
That's exactly so. In fact, that touches upon, I think in the second of the two lectures on higher states of consciousness, he then has a diagram that he evokes, which is the plausibility model, he calls it, right? I found that very enlightening.
Mm-hmm.
The way he talks about the three parts of it, convergence, and he's very careful because it's not like he's saying, I have causal proof of these connections.
Mm-hmm.
Saying these are inputs into a machine or into the model, and these are convergent factors from different sources. And on the other side is elegance, because it can, if it works, then I can be very clear about explaining multiple things that happen. And then the model is the fluency model, like how fluent are you with the parts of it? And that suggests the optimal grip, the metaphor of grip again, like how you can capture it. I found that to be very interesting way of thinking about any new topic that I am thinking of that I'm not familiar with, or a
Mm-hmm.
new set of ideas that I'm getting exposed to. And if I try to think of it and say, are these just convergent ideas, but I don't really have a clue around how they interrelate or how fluent they are. And I certainly don't have an idea about how elegant they are in explaining. And then he describes this as if it's like, it can be at one extreme conspiracy theory, right? Very little convergence, but explains the whole world. On the other hand, it's trivial because everything is making sense, but so what, right?
Yeah, I thought that's something I actually want to spend more time sort of memorizing to some degree, because I agree with you. When he went through that, I was very intrigued that it's a model actually of sorting, right? I mean, you can say, because he says something could be very powerful potentially, like the example he goes that the royal family are actually lizard aliens, but it's so implausible that you don't need to entertain it, right? You're just like, okay, powerful if true, but a stupid idea anyway. Very unlikely, right? And then what was the other one? Is so there was whether it was trivial.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's true, but it's not profound, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, that's interesting too.
So that actually is interesting. As the purest connection and aside, I don't want to take it off the subject, but Vervaeke has been having series of conversations with Bernardo Kastrup, if you know who that fellow is.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so these are, I just fell into the rabbit hole through Vervaeke. This dude is, this philosopher is called analytical idealism philosopher. Anyway, he's a metaphysician. He talks about the reality of the world. And the reason I found him is through the Hindu Advaita philosophy idea that he subscribed to. This is a physicist philosopher. And Vervaeke and he have a 4-hour, 2 parts lectures,
Wow.
almost 7-hour, 2-part lectures in a conversation where Vervaeke's ideas are getting challenged by this guy's metaphysics, and Vervaeke and he are figuring out what the metaphysical basis of Vervaeke's ideas are.
Wow.
Because Vervaeke is very cautious about making metaphysical claims about reality. He's saying, I'm going to talk about wisdom from multiple traditions. And he very judiciously, the closest he comes to Vervaeke is what he calls Neoplatonism, where there is something other than the material world, and he calls that Platonic or Neoplatonic, etc. But he never goes out and makes a claim about the metaphysics view of the world. Anyway, I'm sorry. If you, I'll put a pin on that. If you are remotely interested in metaphysics, especially, then I can say, since it's Vervaeke and this guy talking.
Yeah, can you put that in the chat? I'd like to check it out.
I'll send it to you later while we talk.
Because
good. Sorry,
I'll be on vacation after tonight, so I can.
The reason I know why it sparked it. The reason is Vervaeke uses this plausibility model. So when he's arguing with a metaphysics philosopher, Vervaeke uses the plausibility model to say, what you're telling me is this. This is how I see some pieces falling in. This is what I don't quite see falling out. So let's talk about what you're telling me is plausible or not. So that's what I saw, like the master in action. Vervaeke trying to apply this in a new domain.
Well, the other thing that I'm going to be very curious about for all of this is when we actually start to try to use his recommendations. Because that's how I judge the validity of something for myself, is I try it. And then I say, like, I did Wim Hof ice bath stuff and breath work, and it really helps me. And, so I don't just believe it. I actually have experienced the shift as a result, right? So therefore, if someone says, what do you think of Wim Hof? I'm like, well, from my perspective, it's genius, because it's made a huge difference in my life. I also don't believe it's perfect for everybody. I never make that assumption, right? Because everyone, people may have a different path that resonates with them in a way that motivates them to go forward. So whatever, but interesting. So what else we got?
Is there any sense as to how, so I think you just said once you start trying to apply.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? How do you
Oh,
imagine
sure.
that
So,
happen?
well, that's a good question. So what I have in place in my life, and it's been true for a bit now, is I am dedicated to practicing every day. Now, I have a practice commitment. Now, what I practice is variable. It can be variable. But what I tend to do is I'll take whatever I'm, some things I just keep doing, like the ice bath I do every day now because I have it set up to do that. But there may be, like, I've been trying out yoga nidra, which I never really tried on a regular basis. And, I'm pretty much doing it every day now as an additional practice. And then I observe, what sort of changes am I observing? Am I seeing improvements in things that I am concerned about? And the answer is yes for yoga nidra. And, my diet, I've tried a lot of diets, and I finally settled on a paleo diet, especially autoimmune paleo to start with, because it actually has done more for me than any other diet. The only way I know that is fully committing and daily practicing that, whatever that focus is, and then observing how it affects my life and my health or whatever my issues are. Or sometimes it doesn't make me just a kinder person or whatever. I mean, these different practices have different effects. So that's how I determine, rather than deciding mentally that something's good, I let my mind kind of draw me, towards something that seems relevant, and then I try it, and then I decide whether it actually fits into relevance for me. And that's the only way I know how to sort anything out. I mean, I think that the whole thing he says about someone says, oh, I can't practice this because then I'll lose my subjectivity, is absolute garbage. Like it'd be like saying, I want to know how to make love, but I'll never do it. I'm just going to read about it. So it's like, come on, like that's absolutely stupid. And yet that is kind of a very dominant way of thinking these days. So I believe that, practices have to be a permanent part of one's life if you want to advance your consciousness and your wellness. I don't think it just happens by sitting around. It's like Vervaeke said, how much time, what was it, Aristotle? How much time are you putting into developing yourself? I think that's a very, very relevant thing to ask oneself. How much am I investing?
Developing character.
Yeah, your character. Thank you, your character. And I think, dedicating to any commitment is the character development. I mean, that's my, meaning literally you promise to attend to something regularly. That's, whether it's a relationship or your practice, your meditation, doesn't matter, even your workout routine. It is, I believe it's the same thing, is that it's a character building exercise that in itself, just the commitment itself builds character. Even if the practice isn't perfect, that's not the issue really. It's the commitment to practicing, I believe, is most important.
So I love where you're going with that. I'm a little concerned we may be getting off of track.
Oh yeah.
What you want to stay focused on? Is there?
That was a detour. Ignore my comments and the links. Links are not important. That was only for Michael. Stay on the path.
Yeah, we're staying focused.
Well, so Michael and I were starting to talk about, we're starting to stray from the strict topics of the episodes. It's 11 and 12, right? And I'm wondering if you want to rein us back in, or if you want us to
listen. This is our time. My goal is to have the productive conversation. Let the spirit move you.
Where I would go then is I would go back to in the introduction, at the very beginning of this whole thing, because I'm all in, you guys. like the ecology of practices that he's talking about. So I'm doing my best. And Michael, it sounds to me like you are too.
Mhm.
And the little bit that I know about Anu and Bish, I think you guys are we're all playing the same game here. So when you talk about the difficulty here is this what Vervaeke is laying out is pretty sophisticated. So
Yes.
incorporating, when we say to apply what he's laying down, okay, what exactly does that mean? So if I back way up, he lays out three questions that he's trying to answer over the course of this entire lecture series. And I think they are, what is meaning? Why do we seek it? And what was the bit about wisdom? Is how do you cultivate wisdom?
Wisdom.
The
Yes,
third one.
exactly. Well, that, I mean, he also says psychotechnologies are, I mean, my impression is that he's saying the psychotechnologies are an integral part of doing that. Right. And he's introducing us to different potentials in that regard.
I struggle with what you're saying, Cam, same way you do. And here is how I make sense of it and love to see. I see the entire 50 chapter course, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, as simply what I would call a set of frameworks that are theoretical, because they are designed to change our way of thinking and our assumptions. I don't think they are a set of practices. Therefore, I struggle with the same thing. To the degree that they are conceptual frameworks that change our mind about meaning making, they help us prepare the ground for practices, but they're themselves not practices. For example, if based on what we are saying, we say, okay, let me see if I want to have a transcendent experience. Let me see if I want to go to the mountain and reflect for 2 days. He doesn't come out and say, here is a practice, and one of the practice involves you going after the mountain, and here is the journal you take, and here are the 6 questions you ask. That would be a practice, right? And here is a psilocybin dosage, and here is what you prepare yourself to do, and here is how you record it. That's a practice, right? So I don't see actually any of the episodes of 50 as directly prescribing practices. This is his, what I would say, university level course of how to change your mind before you change your practice, is how I see it. So I actually fall for the same trap because I have a propensity to be more of a thinker than a doer. So I really want to get past the thinking part and where possible start saying, what is it that we have to do? The EMP exercise where we all met was a practice, right? So I don't know yet a laundry list of practices that are directly mapped to each of these episodes. There might be, and I've not taken his subsequent course on After Socrates either.
Yeah, I started doing that. I haven't done that either. Have you gone through all 51 already?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Oh, you have? Okay, so that's interesting because I expected it eventually he would give us practices, but
Well,
maybe I'm
so
wrong about
I haven't gone through all of the videos,
Me
but
either,
I'll
yeah.
give you my point of view, which
Please.
is that I think he is teaching us, or I won't say he's teaching us, but you can use what he is saying to build up your own ecology of practices, because he's laying out the meta practices that you should follow. So here's what I've taken from what we've gone through so far. Find something that puts you in the flow state often, because being in the flow state allows you to solve more patterns, and the more patterns you solve, the more meaning you find in your life. Find ways to scale your attention up, find ways to scale your attention down. I think he gives mindfulness meditation as a way of scaling it down, and then contemplative practices or journaling to scale it up. So that's 3 practices, right? Find a way to journal that makes sense to you. Find a way to meditate that makes sense to you, and find a thing that you can go and do on a daily or weekly basis that puts you in the flow state. And I think I'm hoping that as we go through more of the lectures, there's more layers that we will add on to this. So it's like now I know that part of why the flow state and this attention scaling is useful is that it primes you to enter a higher state of consciousness more easily. So I'm like, okay, now
don't just know what to do, I know why I'm doing it. So I feel like there's some cognitive and then experiential alignment in terms of, my ecology of practices. So that's the way I'm approaching it, and it feels useful to me. So maybe that's a good way to frame it, and then,
That's
actually start.
helpful. I think you're probably on to something. I mean, it's almost like if I think about it, you're right. He says zoom in, zoom out, right? That's part of the recommendation. Also that kind of even the sorting of is it, powerful? Maybe. Is it plausible? No. Or yes. And so on. And so those things can be used to help you sort even what you might try as a practice, I think, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is what it's more like he's giving you the tools to navigate yourself towards what would be work best for yourself if you keep in mind his guidelines. The framing, actually, it's a framing in itself, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. I
I
feel like
think
this is his psychotechnology that he's sharing with us.
That was really well said, Vish. Thanks.
completely
thank you.
agree, Vish. And it's he's indicating, to use the word you are using and Michael is using, these are frameworks and toolkits. He's exposing us to it. We can't help but to think about how to use the toolkit. However, these are not instructions for the practice. This is not like, here's the best way to journal. Here is the best way to meditate. Here's the best way to do XYZ state, etc. So I think that's the part that I think is left to others, because I don't think that's the intent of the course at all. Although it's a groundwork for that. Repeating, sorry.
Well, this is, Vish, what you said. I mean, what both of you guys are saying is really helpful, because it's gonna help me reorient what I'm tuned to here. I think I was oriented automatically towards, oh, he's just building up to tell us how to practice. And I'm really glad to know that that's not going to happen, because then I can actually look for a different thread than I was looking for.
So let me not, I'm not trying to undersell this. In fact, I think he is actually setting up for a later part where he actually makes original contributions of picking together and putting together everything that he's exposing. So he is actually creating, at the end of the course, a master toolkit of all the toolkits he's exposing.
Okay.
And that's his relevance realization framework, which is pretty profound, pretty big. And he's taking 50 episodes to get you there. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
and therefore, there's a logic to why he's building it the way. For example, the next episodes we will cover next time would be on Buddhism and the whole idea of parasitic capture, and how our brain gets logged into all kind of suffering patterns. He could not have approached that without the plausibility and without the higher state of consciousness discussion. So these courses and the chapters are very intelligently architected to build on each other. And the edifice he's building towards is his integration of all the toolkits, which happens, I think, in the last third of the course.
Yeah, that's
my preview.
That's helpful. I mean, I'm really grateful to have that framing to help me even to think about what we've learned so far and realize what I may go back and outline for myself. Like, okay, what are the principles he's teaching us? And, the principles are almost like goalposts. So it says, go from here to here and here, but you're going to have to fill in the slots. I mean, in other words, it's almost like one of those outlines that say, I blank, meaning my name, your name, want to, and then, what place do you want to travel to? I mean, it's this sort of thing where he's framing it like that, I think. Is that true? You think that's right? Yeah. Okay. That's going to really help me orient around the material. Wow. That's a really helpful. And see, this is why it's so helpful to do this with other people.
I agree. It's really good to have a conversation.
Because I can tell I got stuck in a frame. I assumed that it was going to be, he's going to talk about practices specifically eventually. And that's just an assumption I made, I guess, because that's how I orient. Funny. but it's funny, I'm already seeing all these parallels between what he's describing and what some of the therapies I offer in my office are supposed to do for you. That's really fascinating. And the thing that I also think is fascinating, he hasn't really gone into this very much at all, is that what I've learned from some of the modern neuroscience is that physiological shifts are what change psychological orientations. So, and it can happen the other way around, but according to what I've studied, physiology drives psychology way more than the other way around.
Yeah.
So this is part of what a huge mistake in the modern world. We think I can think, therefore I am. No. Your body responds, and that's how you are. Or that's how you experience yourself as. So the body's interpretation, the subconscious nervous system, is what drives most of your psychological orientations most of the time.
Yeah, and I knew I am gonna put a plug in here to follow Michael's path with the ice baths. If you're looking, if you want to get out of the thinking
Oh,
and do something,
it's amazing.
that is a profound practice. So the words coming out of Michael's mouth right now, they won't land verbally anymore. You'll know in your body.
So let me ask a clarifying question on that. I've not gone through what's called the Wim Hof method. What's the
Wim
method?
Hof, yeah, Wim Hof.
Wim Hof method. Are all three of you proficient in it?
I've done the breathing. I haven't done the ice baths yet, so that's something I need to
go
add in.
swimming in the river out here every morning, almost every morning.
That's awesome.
It's running about 43 degrees right now, I think.
That's perfect. That's really a sweet spot right there.
It is. It's gorgeous.
I'm glad that you get to swim in water like that. I have to use this ice pot, it's called, which is this round thing that I set up. But I've been doing it for 3 years, and yes, I followed it. It's not exactly an exact prescription, by the way. It's just a guideline. But 3 years, and it's only recently I've done the ice bath every day, and that, boy, doing it every day is another level. It's something because it keeps correcting any sort of dysregulatory sort of stress cycle I have. And every day, every 24 hours, I get a reset, and it's
the heart. Just what you were saying about the body taking the psychology. If you look at that, what is that? The hippocampus, the way that's structured, it's like the body just takes and wrenches the rest of the cognitive structure. When you put it in a circumstance like that, the psychology comes right along for the ride.
But here's the thing: is especially when you do the colder baths, you cannot think.
Yeah,
you can't, and it's this trip because you get in there and your brain shuts off, and all you're aware of is sensation. And the sensation also shifts because you feel an adaptive shift, especially when you've done it a while. You
feel the cycle.
Yeah,
you feel the waves of adrenaline. You feel the physiology riding. Yeah, it's wild.
I'm glad you said that.
Changes. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a huge ad. I'm gonna try it. I've been trying only cold shower, but apparently that is good and it's bracing enough, but apparently that's not enough, right?
Well, it's just different. I mean, you don't want to diss the cold shower. I mean, I started with the cold shower, and it was still very helpful, but there is nothing comparable in terms of the physiological shift. And also the shower is kind of rather annoying in some ways, unless you have a high flow. It's like being tickled with needles. And when you get into the bath, it's way more soothing. It's like, because you're surrounded, and it almost feels like a weight on you, but a good one, like a hug, right? It's a cold hug, but it's a hug. And so there's a containment aspect too.
Interesting.
That's my experience.
And you have a dedicated apparatus for this.
Yeah, well, if you want to do it, I think that the Wim Hof app is well worth using.
I do too.
Yeah, it's very good.
That's what I started with also about 3 years ago, and it was a slow walk up to it.
Wonderful, thank you.
You don't have to rush, and I didn't rush. I did breath first, and then I did the showers, and I worked up to 10-minute showers, and then I tried the baths, and I only did it once a week at first. So, which is actually ultimately a bit harder, by the way. It's actually the more frequently the better, but that's not always easy because I had to haul the ice in. Now I don't. I'm creating my own ice now, which is way better. But I couldn't figure that out at first. So, and it saves a lot of money too. The ice adds up.
Wow.
Well,
So that is coming back to the topic on hand. That's a higher state of consciousness.
yeah, no, I think so. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, it's well, for Anru and Vish, do you guys have practices that you find reset you? I mean, do you already do things now that you find do that?
To a certain extent. I mean, movement like running, or
Mhm.
now I've been going to parkour since our EMP.
Oh, you lucky guy. I haven't been able to do that. So
Yeah, and it's been amazing. You know, that's where I'm finding that sense of flow, and yeah, I can honestly tell you that qualitatively things feel a lot better with parkour as a daily practice.
oh
But
yeah.
I guess it's a very different kind of practice than something like the cold immersion, which I think is not just on the one hand, I could say, yeah, it's a way of scaling your attention down because you're focusing on the sensation.
Absolutely.
But I feel like, to your point, physiologically, so much is happening under the hood, right? With your immunity is getting boosted, the cold is doing all of these things to your dopamine release after you come out, and so yeah, it is something that I've been meaning to start with, but I feel like both of you convinced me to go take it seriously. So,
Well,
Michael, I might reach out to you to find out like what tub you're using or like what you
sure.
did
Oh,
to
I'll be
actually.
glad to share everything I know. Well, I also wanted to emphasize that what you're doing, parkour as a practice, is in no way lesser, because it's, I mean, just from what I've studied, neuroscience, like polyvagal theory, it's social, and it's also you synchronizing with the environment, so to speak. You know, and as they told us in the workshop, and so it has as much potential to help with what we're talking about as ice baths. It's just different. I mean, it's a different stimulus, but it has I think a parallel benefit, so to speak. Like I think what would be best is do both. I mean, I want to do what you're doing too. I haven't figured it out yet how to do that regularly.
Fair.
Do you do it? Is it a gym you're at or something?
There's a gym. There's actually a gym close to where you are at as well. I think it might be a little far away. I can send you the link to the other
Yeah,
place that I know.
please do. I would really like to figure out how I can do it at least once a week or so,
Okay,
just to get into that world again.
yeah, for sure.
My
Wow.
practice is very trivial. I have a hodgepodge of practices in the morning. For 1 hour, I do, depending upon the mood, some combination of yoga, breathing, strength, like weights.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to do some combination of that. My cold shower is my way of like waking up after that. And I do take religiously at least 2 long walks a day with the dog after lunch and after dinner, which cumulatively add up to about 3 to 4 miles a day. That's it. So if I can preserve that architecture of effort, but I do want to do some of these high intensity things that can have a huge effect. So I'll try this.
I mean, I don't think those are trivial at all. I just want to tell you that
Yeah.
that's not trivial what you're doing. I mean, especially if you're doing it regularly. Because walking is a highly regulatory activity. Do you do it? Is there any woods near you, or is it?
No, but it's we have a little bit of, and on the weekends, if you're lucky, we go for a hike for an hour.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And you know, your meditation, yoga, all that. That's, again, you have a practice. Everyone does here. You know, I'm not surprised, but.
Gentlemen, I want to just check in on. Let's conclude this session if that's okay, and we'll set up for the next time in a second.
That sounds good.
Hold on.